Welcome to MSL Stories. Friends, if you don't mind, please subscribe to my channel. I have a dream of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. Let's start the story. My name is Mark, and until recently I thought I had it all figured out. I'm 34, a software engineer with a comfortable life, and I used to be married to Emma, my wife of 6 years. We met during college and got married shortly after graduation. Life had its ups and downs, like any marriage, but overall things were good. Or at least, that's what I told myself. It started innocently enough. Emma began going out to girls' nights with two friends who she said were visiting from abroad. She'd mentioned how close they were back in college, and since they'd moved to different countries, it made sense that she'd want to spend as much time as possible with them now. I even encouraged her, told her to make the most of their visit. Why not? We didn't have kids yet, and she deserved to enjoy herself. At first it seemed normal. Emma would come back late, tired but happy, telling me funny stories about the nights they spent catching up on old times. I didn't give it a second thought. I trusted Emma completely. We'd always had a solid relationship, or so I believed. But then there was that night she didn't come back when she said she would. We had plans to watch a movie, just something we did from time to time to unwind. But as the hours ticked by, she wasn't answering her phone. Midnight came and went. My worry started as a tiny itch, but quickly grew into a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to seem like the paranoid husband, so I told myself that she was just caught up having fun with her friends, but I knew deep down that something wasn't right, and that night would be the start of everything unraveling. As I sat there staring at the clock, watching the minutes slide past midnight, the feeling in my gut twisted tighter. Emma still wasn't answering her phone. I had texted her several times, then called. Nothing. By 1 a.m., my patience had eroded. She was supposed to be home hours ago. We had agreed to watch that movie after all. I decided to call one of her friends, Hannah, the supposed host of this girls' night. The phone rang and rang. I almost hung up, but then Hannah answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "Hey Mark, what's going on? It's late," she said. "Yeah, I know, I'm sorry," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady and light. "I was just checking to see if Emma was still at your place. She's not answering her phone, and I was starting to get worried." There was a pause on the other end, a long one. Emma?" Hannah's voice sounded puzzled. "Mark, I'm not home. I've been abroad for the last month, remember? I left for Europe." The knot in my stomach twisted tighter. I kept my tone casual, like I hadn't just had the floor drop out from under me. "Oh, right," I said, forcing a chuckle. "I totally forgot. It's late. I must be out of it. Sorry to bother you." "Yeah, no worries. Hope everything's okay," she said. But there was a touch of curiosity in her voice that made me feel exposed. I hung up quickly. My pulse was thudding in my ears, and a wave of heat surged up my neck. I didn't want to think what I was thinking, but the signs were starting to line up in a pattern I couldn't ignore. I needed to be sure, so I called her other friend Jess, who was also supposedly at the girls' night. When Jess answered, her voice was a cheery contrast to the storm building inside me. We made some small talk before I casually slipped in. "By the way, you're still abroad, right? I remember Emma saying you were in South America for work." "Yeah, still here," Jess confirmed, sounding genuinely surprised by the question. "Why? Did something happen?" No, just checking in. Sorry for bothering you so late," I replied, my voice tight with forced ease. By the time I hung up, my head was spinning. Emma had lied, twice. Whatever these girls' nights were, they definitely didn't involve Hannah or Jess, and that's when the doubt took root, deep and bitter. Emma had always been trustworthy, or so I thought, but now I was starting to realize just how little I knew about what she'd really been doing. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the dim glow of my phone screen. It was well past 2 a.m. now, and I still hadn't heard a word from Emma. As I stared at her last "see you later" text from earlier that evening, my mind raced with all the possible places she could be, and none of them were good. I opened the location sharing app that Emma and I had set up years ago, more as a convenience than anything else. We used it to find each other in crowded places, or just to keep track of where we were during busy days. I hadn't checked it in months, never had a reason to. But now, I tapped on her name and waited for the little blue dot to appear on the map. When it did, my stomach sank. The dot was moving slowly along a street I knew well, in a neighborhood that wasn't anywhere near where the supposed girls' night should have been. It was Alex's neighborhood. Alex, her old college flame. My thoughts raced back to a time years ago when Emma had once confessed, half laughing, that she had been madly in love with Alex during our college days, though he had never reciprocated those feelings. We had all stayed friends over the years, or so I thought, But suddenly, that old story didn't seem so innocent anymore. I threw on a jacket and grabbed my car keys, the night air hitting my face as I stepped outside. The drive was a blur. Only the destination stood out in my mind, looming larger with each passing second. As I approached Alex's apartment building, I parked across the street, out of sight, and waited. The seconds dragged into minutes, and then I saw her. Emma emerged from the building, hair disheveled and her clothes rumpled in a way that no amount of excuses could explain away. A minute later, Alex appeared, strolling casually out the door like he didn't have a care in the world. They didn't see me, but I saw everything. The way she looked at him, the way he touched her shoulder as they said goodbye, it was more than enough. My pulse pounded as a red haze crept across my vision. I took a deep breath and calmed myself. Bursting out and confronting them right then and there wouldn't do any good. I needed to keep my composure. I needed to know more before I made my move. I waited until Emma got into her car and drove away, then followed her at a distance. She drove home, parked in our driveway, and went inside as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't just spent the night with another man. I sat in my car for a few more minutes, the cold seeping into my skin. Then, I finally headed inside, making sure to act as if I had just woken up. "Hey," I said groggily, pretending to rub the sleep out of my eyes as she stepped into the living room. "Hey," she replied, glancing at the clock. "Sorry, I lost track of time. We were just talking and catching up, you know." "Yeah, of course," I said, forcing a smile. "You must be tired. We can watch the movie some other time." She nodded, already walking toward the bedroom. I watched her retreating figure, feeling a surge of anger mixed with an almost clinical detachment. I had the truth now, or at least part of it, but I needed proof, concrete, undeniable proof before I took the next step. The game was on. The next few days were an exercise in restraint. I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, playing the role of the unsuspecting husband while Emma continued her charade. She went out a few more times, each time with some variation of the same excuse. I stopped asking questions, and I'm sure she took my silence as a sign that I trusted her, or maybe that I simply didn't care enough to dig deeper. In truth, I was collecting everything I needed to confirm what I had already seen. I went back through months of phone records, texts, and emails. Emma had been careful, but not careful enough. There were calls and messages to Alex, some disguised as group conversations with old college friends, others more private. I found a separate messaging app she'd used to avoid detection, with messages that hinted at something deeper than just a casual affair. I even dug up an old photo from a night out months ago where they stood a little too close, their smiles a little too familiar. I spoke to a divorce lawyer before I confronted her, someone who came highly recommended, known for being ruthless in high-conflict cases. He assured me that if I could document Emma's infidelity, I'd have the leverage I needed to keep as much of my assets as possible. That was the first step. The second would be a bit more personal. The evening I decided to confront Emma, I made sure everything was in place. I set up a voice recorder on my phone and placed it discreetly in my pocket. Then, I waited for her to come home from one of her girls' nights. She arrived a little before midnight, looking slightly annoyed to find me awake in the living room. "You're up late," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "I was just thinking," I replied, my tone even and calm. "How was your night?" "It was fine," she said, glancing away. "Why?" "No reason." I paused, then continued. "I was just curious if Alex was there." Her eyes snapped to mine, a flicker of surprise followed by a flash of anger. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "Why would you even—" "I know, Emma." I didn't raise my voice. I just kept looking at her, unblinking. "I know you've been seeing him. I know about the messages, the late nights at his place. I know everything." Her expression shifted rapidly, from shock to indignation, then to something else entirely. Guilt, maybe, or just the frustration of being caught. "It wasn't what you think," she began, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake, Mark. How many mistakes exactly?" I cut her off. "Was it 5, 10, or did it start even before you began lying to me about your girls' nights?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her eyes glistened as though she might cry. But I wasn't about to be swayed by any last-minute attempt at pity. "It's over, Emma," I said, my voice as cold as I could make it. "I'm filing for divorce, and don't even think about trying to fight it because I have all the proof I need." For a moment I thought she might try to argue, to explain or beg, but then her expression hardened. "Fine," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Do whatever you need to do." "Trust me," I replied as I walked past her toward the bedroom. "I already have." That night I slept in the guest room. Emma didn't make any attempt to come and talk to me, and I didn't expect her to. We both knew that whatever we had was already shattered. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that divorce wasn't enough. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about making sure that she and Alex both felt the consequences of what they'd done. It was time to set my revenge plan in motion. With the divorce papers already being processed, I shifted my focus to the next phase, ensuring Emma and Alex faced the fallout from their actions. I wasn't interested in loud confrontations or public scenes. I wanted a precise, calculated revenge that would unravel their lives piece by piece, just like they had unraveled mine. I started by gathering more information, using my skills as a software engineer to my advantage. It didn't take long to find traces of their relationship scattered across social media, even if they had tried to keep it hidden. Geotagged photos, overlapping check-ins, and subtle comments from mutual friends all painted a clear picture. I saved everything. Next, I contacted my divorce lawyer, laying out a strategy to not just win the settlement, but to do it in a way that would leave Emma with as little financial stability as possible. My lawyer assured me that since I had concrete evidence of her infidelity, I could likely protect most of my assets, and even the house. Emma had taken out a few small loans that I wasn't fully aware of, and her financial situation was far from secure. Losing her main support would hit her hard. With that taken care of, I turned my attention to Alex. He worked in marketing for a mid-sized company, a job he'd gotten through a mutual friend of ours. I did some digging and found out that Alex had a bit of a reputation. He had been involved in some sketchy deals in his company's advertising department. It wasn't anything that had gotten him in trouble, but it was definitely the kind of behavior HR wouldn't look kindly upon if they were to find out. I composed an anonymous email detailing Alex's questionable practices, attaching some evidence I'd managed to collect from their work records. I kept the message vague enough to protect my identity, but compelling enough to make sure HR would look into it. After sending the email, I set up a few fake social media accounts to spread rumors about Alex's misconduct. It wouldn't take much to damage his reputation once the investigation began. The last piece of the puzzle was Emma's exposure. Instead of confronting her publicly, I decided to let her lies unravel themselves. I came up with the idea of throwing a farewell party for her out-of-town friends, the ones she had been using as her cover story for months. I knew she'd be unable to resist attending, trying to keep up the pretense that everything was fine, especially with our mutual friends in attendance. I rented out a small venue and invited all our friends, including some of Emma's closest confidants. The setup was subtle. I displayed a slideshow of photos from our college years, mixed with more recent ones. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but then I gradually started slipping in photos and screenshots that hinted at Emma's deceit. Images of places where she had supposedly been with her friends, juxtaposed with evidence showing her real location at Alex's apartment. The reactions in the room were priceless. Confusion turned to whispers, and the whispers soon gave way to hushed accusations. I kept my distance, watching as Emma's face went pale. She quickly realized that her stories were collapsing around her. I didn't need to say a word. The evidence was laid bare for everyone to see, and no one was coming to her defense. Emma left the party early, with her closest friends following at a distance, murmuring among themselves. The damage was done, and I could see from the look in her eyes that she knew it. A few days later, I heard through the grapevine that Alex had been fired. My anonymous email had hit its mark, and the internal investigation had brought to light more than even I had anticipated. With his career suddenly in shambles and his reputation stained, it didn't take long for his friends to distance themselves from him. I had struck just hard enough to ensure that neither he nor Emma would recover from this easily. The divorce was finalized shortly afterward. Emma, left with her mounting debts and a dwindling social circle, was forced to move out of the house. I kept it, along with the majority of our shared assets. I didn't care if she was truly remorseful by then or if she regretted everything that had happened. Her regret wouldn't change the choices she made. The only thing that mattered to me was that they both felt the consequences of their betrayal. In the days following the farewell party, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't exactly satisfaction, but a kind of relief that came from knowing the storm I had orchestrated was finally hitting its targets. I didn't need to see the fallout directly. Whispers and rumors from mutual friends trickled back to me, and that was enough. Emma had been humiliated, her lies exposed, and Alex had lost more than just a job. He had lost his reputation. The fallout from the party rippled through our social circle. People I hadn't heard from in months started reaching out, some curious, some concerned, and a few wanting to confirm what they had pieced together. I kept my responses minimal, letting the story build itself in the void I left. Emma's closest friends were divided. Some reached out to me with apologies, others clung to Emma's side, but even they couldn't deny the evidence I'd presented. Emma tried calling me several times, leaving voicemails that alternated between anger and despair. At first, she denied everything. Then she tried to justify her actions. And finally, she pleaded for another chance. I didn't respond to any of it. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. I wasn't going to let her manipulate my emotions just because things were falling apart for her. Then came the news about Alex's firing. It turned out that my anonymous tip had opened a much larger investigation into the company's advertising practices. Apparently, Alex wasn't the only one involved, but he was certainly the most exposed. As the investigation deepened, his colleagues distanced themselves, and his future job prospects grew dimmer. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Alex scrambling to keep his professional life intact, just as he had scrambled to steal moments with Emma behind my back. With their worlds crumbling, I moved on to the final step of my plan, Emma's financial troubles. The divorce settlement was in my favor, and I kept most of our joint assets, including the house. What she was left with wasn't much more than a small apartment and the remnants of our savings. To make matters worse for her, the loans she had taken out without my knowledge began to catch up. Debt collectors started calling her, and I knew she would have to make some difficult choices about how to cover those costs. But I wasn't quite done yet. A week after the divorce was finalized, I received a message from Emma asking to meet. She said she wanted to apologize, to explain herself, but I knew that the real reason was desperation. Against my better instincts, I agreed to see her, if only to hear her out one last time. We met at a quiet cafe, a place we had once frequented when things between us were still good. Emma looked different now. There was a tiredness in her eyes, a weight in her expression that hadn't been there before. She tried to start with small talk, but I wasn't interested in that. "Mark," she finally said, "I just want to say I'm sorry. I know I messed up, and I'm not asking for forgiveness or for us to get back together. I just wanted you to know that I never meant for it to be like this." I looked at her, feeling a surprising lack of emotion. "It's too late for that," I replied. "You lied to me for months, and you didn't care what it did to me as long as you got what you wanted." "I know," she whispered. "I was selfish, and I didn't realize what I was losing until it was too late." I didn't let her continue. "Emma, I didn't agree to meet because I needed closure or because I wanted to forgive you. I came here to tell you that whatever you're going through now is the result of your own choices. You don't get to rewrite the past and paint yourself as a victim." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. I'm struggling. The debts, the friends I've lost. I don't know where to start fixing my life." I stood up, ready to leave. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, turning away. "You had your chance, and you threw it away." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a sense of finality. It wasn't triumph, but it wasn't bitterness either. It was simply the closing of a chapter that had taken an unexpected and painful turn. Emma and Alex were both out of my life, and whatever they did next was their burden to bear. The weeks turned into months, and I slowly began to rebuild. I kept busy with work and hobbies I had neglected during the chaos. I reconnected with old friends, started traveling more, and found solace in the small victories that came with living life on my own terms. I wasn't searching for a new relationship. There was still too much to process from the last one, but I was open to whatever the future might bring. I'd see Emma's number pop up on my phone now and then, though I never answered. Occasionally, I'd hear through the grapevine that she had moved to a cheaper place, or that she was still struggling to find steady work. As for Alex, he was living back with his parents, trying to figure things out, according to a mutual acquaintance. The thought of them together, picking up the pieces of their separate lives, didn't bother me anymore. It felt distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. I had moved on, and I wasn't going to let their betrayal define who I was or what I would become. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about growth, resilience, and finding strength in a time of weakness. The chapter was closed, the book was shut, and I was ready for a new story to begin. Thank you, friends.